My name is Alexandra Pierce. I am 44 years old and the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Air Force. I have spent more than 20 years wearing this uniform, serving my country with everything I have. I have led combat teams through storms. I have survived 2 tours in dangerous territories where every decision carried life or death. I have earned these 4 silver stars on my shoulders not through luck, but through sacrifice, sleepless nights, and standing tall when no one else would. This uniform has opened doors in the Pentagon Foreign Command Centers and at global security summits. But today I stood at the front gate of my brother's promotion ceremony and watched that door slam quietly in my face. Not by a stranger, but by the person who once called me his hero. The young officer at the registration table looked nervous. His tablet screen reflected in his glasses as he scrolled through the list again and again. He told me with soft regret that my name was not listed anywhere. I told him to check again that I was Colonel Daniel Pierce's sister. He glanced at his partner and tried once more, but his face never changed. There was no mistake. I had not been forgotten. I had been erased. It was not just an oversight. I saw it in the way my brother avoided my eyes across the open courtyard. I watched him turn his back to me as if I had never arrived. I stood there in full dress uniform, my medals shining under the spring sun, surrounded by junior officers and proud family members. Yet I had no place in that room. 20 years of service, 4 stars, 2 combat tours, and I could not get past the registration table. There is a particular weight in realizing that your own family can decide you do not belong, that they can look at you and see not pride but inconvenience, that they can carefully draw a line and place you on the outside of it. I have walked through minefields and battlefields without flinching. But this moment pierced deeper than any shrapnel I had faced in combat. The coldness of exclusion wrapped itself around me tighter than the harshest winter deployments. The most brutal thing was how quietly it happened. No arguments, no angry words, just a name missing from a list. Just a sister left standing on the outside in plain sight where everyone could see. So I ask you, have you ever been erased by your own family? Daniel and I grew up in a quiet military town in North Carolina, where our backyard was our first battlefield. Our father, Colonel Richard Pierce, ran our home with the same discipline he brought to his base. Beds were made sharp enough to bounce a coin, shoes lined up like soldiers, and morning started with inspection. But outside those walls, Daniel and I were unstoppable together. We played soldiers until the streetlights came on, crawling through grass and building forts out of branches and cardboard. I planned every mission, and Daniel was always the one charging bravely into the enemy's hideout. He trusted my maps, my crazy rescue routes, even when I told him we had to cross the creek barefoot in the middle of winter to save our imaginary commander. I always made sure he made it back safely, even when we lost the battle. There was a silent rule between us. I would never leave him behind. Our father used to watch us from the porch, his arms crossed, pretending to read the paper. Once, after one of our missions, he told us that we would make fine officers someday. It was rare to hear him say anything like that, and it stuck with me. Daniel looked up to me. He copied the way I tied my boots, the way I saluted when we played. He told me I was his commander, his hero, and I wore that title like it meant everything. Back then, we were not just brother and sister. We were teammates, partners in every made-up war we fought in the woods. Even when we got older, we protected each other from the neighborhood bullies and took turns standing guard during the imaginary overnight patrols in our backyard. The missions got more complicated, but the bond stayed simple. It was always me and him against the world. I believed that no matter what happened, we would always have each other's backs. We dreamed of one day wearing real uniforms, standing side by side, making our father proud. And maybe, just maybe, we would still be the unstoppable team we had always been. Somewhere along the way, things started to shift between us. I didn't notice it at first. Life moved fast when I joined the Air Force, and every step forward pulled me a little further away from the backyard battlefields where Daniel and I had once been a team. I advanced quickly. Promotions came sooner than I expected. People began noticing my leadership in ways I hadn't even noticed myself. When I made captain, Daniel was still a junior officer moving at his own pace. I didn't think it mattered. I believed we were still on the same side, still wearing the same uniform, still playing for the same team. But the phone calls got shorter. The conversations turned cooler. He would tell me he was busy, but I could hear the distance, the way his voice tightened when I shared good news. One time when I visited him at Fort Bragg, I sat across from him at a base restaurant. He raised his glass and said congratulations when I got promoted to major. But his smile didn't reach his eyes, and he said quietly that I was always one step ahead. I thought he was just having a rough day. I told him he would catch up soon. I didn't realize I had already lost him somewhere along the climb. When our mother passed away, we stood together at her funeral, both in uniform, both grieving. I thought that moment would bring us back to each other, at least for a while. He held my hand as I spoke about her, but the silence that followed felt heavier than our shared loss. He said Mom had always been proud of me. I told him she was proud of both of us. He didn't argue, but he didn't believe me either. After that, the gap between us quietly grew wider. I would send him articles about my new assignments, but he barely responded. He sent me a short email when he made lieutenant colonel. I called to congratulate him, but his answers were short, careful. It was like the more I rose, the more he shrank away. Like every step I took forward was another reminder of where he wasn't. I missed the brother who used to chase me through the woods, who used to believe I was unstoppable. I wanted to tell him that I never saw us as rivals. I never needed to win. I just wanted us to be on the same side. When I found out Daniel was being promoted to colonel, I cleared my schedule without hesitation. My calendar is usually packed months in advance, but this was non-negotiable. I moved meetings, reassigned briefings, and turned down a speaking invitation just to make sure I could stand in that room for him. I wanted to be there front and center as his big sister, not as General Pierce, but as Alexandra, who used to build forts with him in the woods. I wanted to surprise him with something personal, something that would remind him of where we came from. I spent hours searching until I found it, a handcrafted family crest engraved with our last name, and the words that meant everything to our father, always faithful. The small shop in Arlington wrapped the crest in deep navy fabric, the same color as our uniforms. Holding it, I could picture his face when he would open it. I could already see the moment we would laugh, the moment we would reconnect. I thought this would be the thing that would bring us back. I called him a few weeks before the ceremony. His voice sounded a little distant, but I brushed it off as stress. When I told him I planned to come, he paused just a second too long and said I didn't need to trouble myself. He said he knew I had more important things on my plate. I told him that nothing was more important than this. I said I wouldn't miss it for the world. He thanked me, but the thank you didn't sound like what I expected. Still, I packed carefully, choosing my full ceremonial Air Force uniform, the one with every ribbon and medal pressed to perfection. I wanted to look right for his big day. I wanted to stand tall in that crowd, not for attention, but to show him how proud I was. On the morning of the ceremony, I woke up early, double-checked my travel plans, and carefully placed the gift in my carry bag. I rehearsed in my mind how I would surprise him, how I would walk up and hand him that crest with a quiet smile. I thought this would be the moment where the old versions of us would return, if only for a little while. There was nothing in me that expected what would actually happen. There was no part of me that thought my name would not be on the list. All I felt was excitement, a soft warmth in my chest as I prepared to stand beside my brother again. I truly believed we were still on the same team. The base was buzzing with energy when I arrived. Flags lined the entrance officers gathered in crisp uniforms, and the music from the string quartet floated through the open doors. I stepped out of my car, my full ceremonial uniform, perfect the family crest gift, carefully tucked under my arm. I walked toward the registration table, nodding at junior officers who saluted as I passed. The two lieutenants behind the check-in desk straightened quickly when they saw me. I gave them my name with a calm confidence, expecting this part to last only seconds. The young lieutenant scrolled through the digital list, his finger moving slower with each pass. He apologized, told me my name wasn't there, and double-checked the family and VIP sections. He looked at his partner, clearly uncomfortable, and told me again I was not listed. I stayed steady. I asked him to please check again. I reminded him I was Colonel Daniel Pierce's sister. The second lieutenant stepped in and scrolled carefully, but his face said what his words confirmed. My name was not on the list. It wasn't an error. I felt the weight of that silence press down on me as I watched the ceremony preparations continue around me. I saw Daniel across the room, speaking easily with other officers, moving confidently through the crowd. He caught my eye for the briefest moment and then turned away like I wasn't there. The cold truth settled into place. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. One of the lieutenants offered to contact the event coordinator. I nodded and stepped aside as they made the call. The security guards nearby began to notice the situation, their eyes flicking toward me with growing nervousness. No one wanted to tell a 4-star general she couldn't enter, but rules were rules. The event coordinator arrived and confirmed softly that my name was not submitted on any list by Daniel or his staff. He apologized but said his hands were tied. I thanked him and walked away from the table, moving toward a quiet corner outside the building. My hands tightened around the gift box as I sat on a stone bench trying to process what had just unfolded. I pulled out my phone and called Erica Dawson, my closest friend, and a general who had walked beside me through years of command and sacrifice. She picked up immediately, and I told her what happened, my voice steady, even though my chest was burning. She paused and said this wasn't just a family issue. This was deliberate. She asked me what I would tell a young officer in this situation. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the entrance, the sound of the ceremony growing louder inside. I told her I needed to think. I told her I wasn't walking away. I sat on the bench for a long time, feeling the burn in my chest slowly settle into something sharper. I had been left out not by accident but by design. I could feel it in every quiet glance and every unanswered space on that guest list. I stood up and walked to my car, each step measured and steady. This wasn't the time to make a scene. This was the time to move with purpose. Inside my car, I pulled out my phone and called Lieutenant Sarah Kim, my aide. I told her to bring my full ceremonial uniform immediately. She didn't ask questions. She simply said she would be there soon. While I waited, I contacted the presiding general, Marcus Hale, a man I had served alongside years ago. I calmly explained the situation. He was quiet for a moment and then told me he would make sure proper respect was observed. I made one final call to the base commander to confirm my entry would be handled correctly when I returned. The base commander was already aware and said he would personally notify the security team. They knew who I was now. When Lieutenant Kim arrived, she handed me the ceremonial uniform pressed perfectly and still warm from preparation. I changed in the quiet of my car, carefully pinning every ribbon, every medal, making sure each one sat in its rightful place. The weight of the uniform shifted as I adjusted the shoulders. These weren't decorations. They were stories. They were proof of the nights I led teams through sandstorms, of the operations I planned that brought people home safely. They were the weight of decisions I carried when no one else wanted them. I fastened the collar, pinned the 4 silver stars on each shoulder, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't just the sister left off a list. She was a leader. She was the highest-ranking officer in that room. I tucked the family crest gift into my bag and started the car. I drove back toward the ceremony with quiet resolve. I wasn't coming back to disrupt or to embarrass anyone. I was coming back to stand where I belonged. As I approached the gate, the security guards recognized my vehicle and snapped to attention. The senior guard greeted me with a crisp salute and directed me to the officer's entrance. I nodded and drove forward, feeling the rhythm of each moment tightening into place. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I was coming back on my own terms, fully present, fully prepared. And I would not be erased this time. The timing had to be precise. I arrived just as the formal promotion had concluded, and the room shifted toward the speeches. The base commander's team met me at the officer's entrance, already briefed, already waiting. They opened the side door as I walked in my full ceremonial uniform, catching the light, every medal in place, every ribbon telling its own story. I stepped forward with quiet purpose, not rushing, not hesitating. I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward me as a hush spread through the crowd. The sound of my shoes against the polished floor filled the wide hall as I moved down the center aisle. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. I did not need to announce myself. The 4 silver stars on my shoulders spoke for me. Daniel stood on the stage, mid-sentence, his mouth slightly open as he saw me approach. His hands tightened at his sides. For a moment his voice caught and his eyes held mine across the space we both now shared. I didn't flinch. I didn't falter. I gave him a small, respectful nod and continued forward. Junior officers along the aisle straightened instinctively. They moved aside without being asked, without being told. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. It was the silent response to someone who had earned her place, who had carried her weight through years of command. I reached the front and quietly took an open seat in the front row. I sat with my back straight, my presence steady, fully visible to Daniel as he stood behind the podium. He gathered himself and tried to continue, but his voice now carried a slight tremble under the surface. He pushed through the rest of his speech, choosing his words more carefully, his pace more deliberate. The room listened, but some of the energy had shifted. The weight of my presence filled the space he had tried to keep me from. When Daniel finished, the presiding general, Marcus Hale, stepped forward with smooth authority. He welcomed the new colonel and then paused, looking directly at me with a slight nod of respect. He invited me to address the room. It was a quiet offer, not on the program, but perfectly appropriate. I rose and moved toward the stage with measured steps, passing Daniel as I climbed. We exchanged no words as I passed him. Just a small nod from me and a stiff glance from him. I stood at the podium looking out over the gathered officers, family, and commanders. I did not need to speak loudly. I simply spoke with the steady voice of someone who had come to stand in the place she rightfully earned. I was not there to take anything from Daniel. I was there to remind everyone, including him, that I had never left. I stood at the podium and took a slow breath, letting the weight of the room settle around me. Leadership is not about rank. It is not about medals. It is not about how loudly your name is called. Leadership is about the quiet choices you make when no one is looking. It is about standing in places where you are not always welcomed, but showing up anyway because it is the right thing to do. Leadership is showing up when others wish you would disappear. I looked around the room, pausing as I met the eyes of the officers who had served in hard places, who understood what it meant to carry responsibility when it was heavy. I looked at my father seated in the front row, and I looked at Daniel still standing to the side, his expression carefully guarded. Families in the military are built on traditions. But traditions cannot be walls that shut people out. They must be doors that open to the future doors that open to those who serve with courage and integrity. I honored Daniel today because his service is worthy of respect. He has worked hard. He has earned his place in this room. But I also know that respect is not optional. It is a responsibility. It is the foundation of leadership. We do not get to choose who is worthy of standing beside us, based on comfort or convenience. We earn our place, and we honor the places others have earned. Even when that recognition is difficult, even when our pride tempts us to close the door. I paused and let the silence fill the space where that truth landed. The strength of our Air Force comes from its ability to honor its traditions while having the courage to change. It comes from knowing that evolution does not erase history. It strengthens it. I glanced briefly at Daniel and then looked back to the room. Daniel will lead well because he knows what it means to serve. He knows what it costs to wear the uniform with pride. On behalf of the Joint Chiefs, I congratulate Colonel Daniel Pierce. I trust that his service will continue to reflect the honor and responsibility we all carry. I stepped back from the podium and returned to my seat, my expression calm, my message delivered. I had not raised my voice. I had not called out the moment that almost erased me, but I had made it clear that I was never truly gone. I had chosen to stand in that room fully present not for revenge but for the simple truth that respect must be practiced, not just spoken. And sometimes leadership is about quietly reminding people that you will not disappear. After the ceremony, the reception moved forward with quiet energy, but I could feel the weight of the unspoken still hanging in the air. Officers came to greet me respectful and cautious, but my eyes kept finding Daniel across the room. He stayed busy speaking with his circle, but he was not as steady as he had been. Our father approached and quietly told me I needed to speak to him in private before rumors grew bigger than they already were. He told me where I could find a small conference room nearby. I thanked him and made my way there, the gift still tucked carefully under my arm. I waited by the window, steady and patient, until Daniel finally walked in and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched, but I didn't move to fill it. He stayed near the door, his posture uncertain. He told me I had handled the ceremony well. He said it softly, without meeting my eyes. I thanked him, but I asked him to tell me the truth. I wanted to know why my name had been left off the list. I asked him plainly, without anger. He sighed and admitted it had not been entirely his idea. He said there were senior officers who had been whispering in his ear. Officers who resisted the changes I had been pushing in the Air Force. They had told him it would be better to keep the ceremony focused on tradition. They had convinced him that my presence would be a distraction. He said he had let them guide his decision because he thought it would finally give him his own space, his own moment. He admitted he let them push him toward a choice he now regretted. I listened to him carefully, weighing his words, feeling the familiar ache of disappointment, but also the small relief that he had finally spoken them. I told him he had let me down, not just as a sister, but as an officer. I told him respect is not something you grant when it is easy. It is something you protect when it is hard. I reminded him that leadership is about more than climbing. It is about how you carry others with you even when their shadow feels heavy. He looked at me, then his voice low and tight, and said he had been chasing my shadow his whole life. He said he thought pushing me away would finally make him feel like he stood on his own. He said he had not realized until today that standing alone is not the same as standing strong. I told him that he never needed to push me away. I told him I always wanted him to succeed, not behind me, not in front of me, but beside me. I told him the part that hurt the most was that I truly believed we were still on the same side. He stood quietly, then told me he had already spoken with his commanding officer. He had requested a transfer to another base away from the voices that had pulled him in the wrong direction. He wanted space to figure out who he was as a leader without them. I nodded slowly, letting that settle between us. It was not everything, but it was a start. I reached into my bag and pulled out the family crest. I told him I had bought it for him weeks ago. I told him I had always planned to give it to him that day, no matter what happened. I handed it to him and he held it carefully, his thumb brushing over the engraved words that had always belonged to our family. Always faithful. He thanked me, his voice quieter, now steadier. He said he would make sure it meant something. He promised he would not forget what I had said, not in that room, not now. We left the conference room separately. The conversation was not over, but it was no longer a wall between us. It was now a place to begin again. There are moments in life when someone will leave your name off the list. Sometimes that someone will be a stranger. Sometimes it will be your own family. You can let that moment shrink you. Or you can choose to stand exactly where you were meant to stand, with your head high and your heart steady. Your worth is never defined by who invites you in. Your worth is defined by how you carry yourself when you are left outside. It is defined by how you show up even when someone hopes you will not. It is built in the quiet moments when you decide you will not disappear. Leadership is not about being loud. It is not about taking up space just to prove a point. It is about showing up with dignity when it costs you something, when standing tall is the hardest thing to do. The lessons I carry from that day are not just about rank or military protocol. They are about family forgiveness and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground without closing your heart. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been erased by your own family? Have you ever been pushed to the side, made to feel small, and still found the courage to stand tall? I would love for you to share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you found your way back to yourself. How you stood up for who you are even when it would have been easier to walk away. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to join our community. We are a space for resilient leaders who believe that the strongest power comes from quiet courage. Sometimes the most important battles are not the ones we fight on fields or in boardrooms. They are the ones where we simply refuse to step aside from our own worth. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing with me.